There are many who have written off the new Star Wars movie, The Rise of Skywalker, as a shameless, cash-grab retcon fanfic to appease the fans who hated The Last Jedi. They are correct, of course, and those were generally my initial impressions. However, I saw it a second time, and after discussing it with my friends and family, I got a little more out of it than I did initially. On my first viewing, the plot was moving so quickly that I wasn't able to identify the themes or consider the character arcs in any meaningful way. There are overarching themes explored in this movie, and I think the movie has a little more to say than most reviewers are giving it credit for. I've seen a lot of reviewers whose opinions and analysis I respect be very dismissive of this film. And I get that. Especially if you enjoyed The Last Jedi, as I did, it's hard to accept the direction that J.J. Abrams chose to take this story. Some of the choices feel like retcons, and it makes you wonder why Kathleen Kennedy and the Lucasfilms team didn't plan this trilogy a bit more carefully, especially considering how meaningful the Star Wars IP is to so many people worldwide. Even the prequels, which were an incomprehensible mess in many ways, were more tonally and narratively consistent as a trilogy than this one.
Hello there.
But the prequels are still worse, guys. Come on. Let's be real here.
I killed them. I killed them all. They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. I hate them.
I'm gonna get going.
Fine, get out of here.
It's getting late.
No.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft.
And smooth.
Yikes! That's gonna be a fucking yikes from me, holy shit.
The problem I have with the way this movie is being covered is that the same reviewers who praised The Last Jedi and criticized some of the hollow backlash against it are now doing the exact same things that they criticize when they talk about The Rise of Skywalker. Many fans had problems with The Last Jedi because the movie didn't meet their expectations. They wanted to see Luke at his best, not at his lowest point. They wanted to see Rey earn her abilities through training, as opposed to struggle with her identity, or lack thereof. They wanted an intimidating villain, not an unstable yet complex one. Many fans, including myself, love The Last Jedi for these reasons, and wrote off many of these criticisms as fans being too attached to their fan theories. And in many ways, that's not too far off. People had an idea of what they wanted The Last Jedi to be, and when it wasn't what they were hoping for, they were upset and cried bad writing. People like me, who didn't expect much from the movie outside of some flashy visuals and a lightsaber fight or two, were more easily able to take a step back and consider the film's merits. But many fans were unable to overlook their disappointment, and instead of analyzing the movie for what it is, decided to write it off as a terrible film that was made with the express purpose of taking a steaming dump on everything they love about the franchise. Many critics agree that this seemed like a bit of a childish response. Calling a movie poorly written because it doesn't line up with your expectations, or didn't capture what you enjoyed about the series, doesn't mean much when you're not meeting the film on its terms. You're more than welcome to want and expect more from a film, or believe that there were better directions the story or characters could have been taken. But instead of discussing what the story didn't do, I think it's more productive to look at what the story actually does. However, despite many critics calling out fans for evaluating The Last Jedi based on preconceived expectations and fan theories, I've seen many reviewers do the same thing when looking at The Rise of Skywalker. Many of them felt that Rian Johnson set the new trilogy free from the need to rely so heavily on the original trilogy, and were excited to see Star Wars go in a fresh, new direction. It no longer felt like we were in for soft reboots of the originals, as many were concerned about after seeing The Force Awakens. Unfortunately, what we got in The Rise of Skywalker left many of the fans of The Last Jedi wanting something a bit more thoughtful, with a bit less hollow fan service that was a bit more divorced from the original trilogy. And many of these fans have written this new one off as the worst Star Wars movie. Even worse than Attack of the Clones, which I personally don't agree with at all. The reviews I have watched or listened to seem to base their criticisms on what they wanted the movie to be, more than what the movie actually is. The Rise of Skywalker is far from perfect, but I think it has more to say thematically than reviewers are giving it credit for. And just to be perfectly clear, I'm not saying that you have to like any of these movies. Star Wars movies are full of contrivances, bad dialogue, and dumb things that are used to sell toys to 4-year-olds. It's perfectly okay to dislike these movies for these reasons, or for any other reasons for that matter. All I'm suggesting is that people criticizing the new movie be consistent with their criticism, and try to evaluate the movie for what it is, as opposed to what you want it to be. There's only so much we can accomplish on our own. However, with the help of others, we can rise above our personal limitations and weaknesses. Rey has been alone since she was a kid, and has been desperate to feel a sense of belonging and purpose for as long as we've known her. In The Force Awakens, she felt the need to stay on Jakku, on the off chance that her parents would return for her one day. In The Last Jedi, she had given up on her parents returning, but she hadn't let go of the hope that her lineage would define her, and help her to determine her place in all of this. In The Rise of Skywalker, Rey, under the tutelage of Leia, is still haunted by her parents' memory, or lack thereof, as the Resistance learns that Palpatine is back from the dead.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Yep, Palpatine is back, baby, in all of his campy, sinister glory. How did he come back after Vader tossed him down that elevator shaft? Well, your guess is as good as mine. But just like the actual movie, we have way too much to get through and no time to dwell on the shocking revelation. Rey, who feels it's her duty as the Last Jedi to deal with this, prepares to go hunt him down herself. But her friends refuse to let her go it alone. For the first time in the sequel trilogy, our heroes have a unified goal, a unified vision, and are actually, literally working together. While on their fetch quest across the solar system, our heroes come into contact with friends old and new, who aid them on their journey to stop the First and Last Order. Poe runs into an old flame, who reminds him to remember that he and the rebels are not alone in this fight. She practically states the first theme of the film outright. They win when they make us think we're alone. This idea is echoed throughout the film, as Finn meets other stormtroopers who deserted the First Order, showing him that there are others out there like him who are willing to break away and fight back against their programming. However, despite her friends who are finding like-minded allies and joining together, Rey herself is falling apart. In The Rise of Skywalker, we finally learn the truth about Rey's background, that she is a descendant of Emperor Palpatine.
Not true. That's impossible!
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
No!
After she nearly kills Chewbacca with her Force powers, this news disturbs her and makes her question her own judgment and control. Her friends try to reassure her that this doesn't change who she is. She's still Rey. But Rey, in her fear, pushes them away and rejects their help. After nearly killing Chewie earlier in the movie, she's worried that she won't be able to keep her powers in check, and that she's a danger to those around her, especially her friends. Despite Leia's warning at the beginning of the film, she's afraid of who she is. Little side note, the scene where Rey destroyed the freighter they thought was carrying Chewbacca bore a striking resemblance to the scene where her parents flew off, leaving her on Jakku. It makes me wonder if in an earlier draft of the film, she had tried to reach out for her parents' ship as they flew away, destroying the ship and them in the process. This didn't happen in the movie, but that would have contextualized her trauma around the incident, and likely would have explained why she had suppressed her memory of them in the first place. But enough script doctoring, let's get back to analyzing the film for what it actually does. With fear driving her every action, Rey parts ways with her friends in an attempt to destroy Palpatine on her own. However, she is continuously being hounded and hunted by Kylo Ren, who has agreed to join forces with Palpatine, at least temporarily. Despite his efforts to get out from under Snoke's thumb in The Last Jedi, he dons his mask once again in the service of a new master. It appears that he was unable to let the past die as he had hoped, and is still trying to finish what Vader started. In the ruins of the second Death Star on the moon of Endor, while searching for a map to lead her to Palpatine, Rey confronts a vision of herself as a Sith. The apparition taunts her with Leia's last words, "Never be afraid of who you are," which is the worst thing Rey could hear in that moment. She is already terrified of her own abilities and fearful of hurting her friends. Despite Dark Rey having weird Bilbo Baggins teeth, seeing herself in this light reinforces her growing fear of who she is, and her potential for evil and destruction. Kylo Ren, understanding Rey's desire to destroy Palpatine, tries to coerce her into joining forces to take the Emperor down together. Kylo, who had previously pushed everyone away in his effort to embrace the dark side, only became weaker by severing his bonds. He followed Snoke's teachings in order to become strong, but murdering his father didn't make him stronger. It made him weaker, more unsure of himself, more alone. The Sith have always pursued power through destruction, while the Jedi, at least in concept, use the Force to protect, never for attack.
A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack.
Never. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
It's a reasonable assumption that, by extension, the Sith can use their power to take life, while the Jedi can use their power to give life. In the new trilogy, the Force has been shown to be kind of like the circle of life. It's a force beyond light and dark, a balance. Kylo destroys the map to Palpatine, which leads Rey to lash out at him in anger and desperation. To her, destroying that Wayfinder has destroyed her ability to defeat her dark side on her own, but allying with others isn't an option for her right now, since she can't trust herself not to hurt or kill those around her. This is reinforced by her pushing Finn away in desperation when he tries to help her fight Kylo Ren. Although Kylo bests Rey in their fight, he is distracted by his mother's death, and Rey uses that opportunity to strike him down. But Rey, regretting attacking him while he was distracted, decides to do the most Jedi thing, restoring his life through the Force by sharing some of her own, giving life as opposed to taking it. She clarifies that she did want to join him, but as Ben, not as Kylo Ren. This is the push Ben needs to throw away his lightsaber, just as Luke did, rejecting the hateful, reclusive nature of the Sith and becoming a Jedi again. But Rey, still fearing her own capabilities and anger, decides to sequester herself on the same island that Luke was hiding out on in the previous movie. She feels that Luke had the right idea when he hid himself away to die, so she chooses to do the same, far away from anyone she might hurt. Just as she has given up all hope, Luke appears as a Force ghost to give her one last lesson. Luke has learned from Rey that allowing the Jedi to end was wrong, and that the heroic ideals and image of the Jedi put forth by Luke is valuable for inspiring hope in future generations. He tells Rey that he and Leia knew she was a Palpatine all along.
Liar!
And although you can easily call bullshit on that statement, the next thing Luke says drives the last theme home. There are things more important than blood. Luke reinforces to Rey that she is not defined by her bloodline, and just as Leia told Rey in the beginning of the movie, she shouldn't fear who she is. She is the one who gets to choose who she is and shape who she wants to be. Rey has everything she needs. Finally confident in who she is, Rey hops into an X-Wing and heads straight for Exegol. Having overcome her fear of herself, she sends her coordinates to her friends to lead them to her location. She's finally willing to ask for help and let people close again. Having lost Leia, Poe is charged with leading the attack on the Last Order, but the daunting task seems impossible. He doesn't feel like he is ready to take command and lead the Resistance to victory over this insurmountable threat. But Lando reminds him that they weren't ready when they had to face the Empire. It was because they had each other that they were able to do the impossible. It's because they weren't alone. When Rey confronts the Emperor, he gives her an ultimatum. Strike him down in anger and rule the galaxy as the new Empress, or sacrifice her friends and allies to the fleet of Star Destroyers above. Rey tells him that she won't give in to hate. She will choose mercy, just as Luke did. But Palpatine reminds her that Luke had his father there to save him.
The only family you have here is me.
But Palpatine doesn't factor in the strength of Rey's bonds. The friendships and connections she and her allies have made along the way is the one thing he didn't account for. Just as things are at their bleakest, reinforcements arrive to save the fleet, and Ben arrives to fight alongside Rey, proving she is no longer alone. She has found a family in the Resistance. Palpatine, channeling the dark side, uses the Force to take life from Rey and Ben, and unleashes his Force lightning upon her new family fighting in the air above. But Rey, harnessing the power of the Jedi who came before her, protects her friends with a defensive stance. Now this might be a bit charitable, but I think this stance is significant. Not once does Rey move to attack or strike down the Emperor with a lightsaber. All she does is shield her friends from Palpatine's Force lightning. This lightning has become synonymous with the Sith, as it is a weaponized version of the Force used only to destroy. It is pure, unadulterated negativity and hate channeled into an attack. So Rey standing firm in opposition to this attack of pure hate, in turn, rejects the hate Palpatine desired her to adopt. Just as Yoda said as a Jedi should act, Rey chooses to use her power to protect, not attack. In the face of Rey's firm desire to protect her new family, Darth Sidious is literally undone by his own lightning, destroyed by his own hate. However, in her effort to save those she loves, Rey sacrifices her life. But Ben, having learned from Rey's example, chooses the path of the Jedi. In stark contrast to Palpatine, who used the Force to take life, he uses the Force to give life back to Rey, the one who helped him realize that he didn't have to be alone. By doing so, he finally finishes what Vader, or rather Anakin Skywalker, started, by saving someone he loves from dying. So in the end, as cringy as you might think it is, Rose's words from The Last Jedi ring true. Our heroes don't win by destroying what they hate, but by saving what they love. And that concludes my thematic analysis of The Rise of Skywalker. Now I know this is a rather charitable read of this movie, but despite all of the dropped plot threads and the apparent studio interference, I think the story on display, though a little half-baked, is pretty powerful. It might not be the story many of us wanted, but it does feel true to the larger themes of Star Wars that made me fall in love with the series in the first place. There are plenty of things that I wish this movie had done differently, such as actually having a character arc for Finn and Poe in the final movie, or not retconning the Return of the Jedi by bringing back the Emperor, or continuing Kylo Ren's character arc from The Last Jedi instead of making him subservient to another master, or making Rey a fucking Palpatine. But for everything I hated about this film, there is something about it that I loved just as much. Like our main characters finally getting to go on an adventure and interact with each other, or C-3PO's larger role and comedic moments, or the incredible scene between Han and Kylo, where Kylo repeats his line from The Force Awakens in a new context, and Han gives his final line in the franchise, harkening back to his famous response to Leia in Empire, "I know." It's stuff like this that saves the movie for me. And despite my opinion that they could have done better in so many ways, there is still so much here for me to love. So, in conclusion, if you hate this final installment in the Skywalker saga, that's fine. But if you decide to rewatch it, try thinking less about what you want the movie to be, and more about what it is. You may still find things to hate about it, but you might just find something to love too.